Heartbroken Emily Miller faced monstrous injustice when greedy Undertaker Abel Crowley fraudulently seized her father's land, her last possession. Cynically profiting from grief, Crowley didn't know the deceased Joseph Miller had left a dying note that changed everything. The desperate daughter, armed only with her father's final words, defied the ruthless swindler. Prepare to discover how one small note exposed a terrible truth and why justice ultimately triumphed over all the Wild West's lies. The air in Abel Crowley's small, stuffy funeral parlor was heavy, thick with the scent of lilies and crushing despair. In the corner, on a makeshift coffin of cheap, untreated wood, lay a worn leather wallet, all that remained of Joseph Miller, an honest but poor prospector who had succumbed to fever. His only daughter, 16-year-old Emily Miller, stood beside the coffin, clutching a faded photograph. Her sole inheritance was a small, promising plot of land her father, Joseph, had willed to her. When Abel Crowley, the local undertaker, a man with a perpetually mournful expression and fingers sticky with avarice, announced the burial fee, Emily felt a true shock. It was 10 times more than she could ever have imagined, an utterly insurmountable sum for her. Crowley, notorious for his exorbitant greed, always profited from others' sorrow, shamelessly extracting every last cent from orphaned and destitute families. "No money, no burial, child," he croaked, his gaze sweeping over her face, assessing her despair. "But perhaps your land, it's well situated, isn't it?" Emily, speechless at such a cynical offer, saw the Undertaker already savoring his profit from her tragedy. She was too young, too overwhelmed by recent grief to resist or grasp the full extent of his calculation. With every passing minute, her shock morphed into a burning, painful realization. She was being swindled, mercilessly exploited in her most vulnerable state. She felt trapped, with no room to maneuver. Crushed by unbearable grief and cynical deception, Emily's trembling hand signed the documents. Undertaker Crowley acquired her only plot of land for a laughable sum, promising only a decent burial for her father. The next day, Joseph Miller was hastily interred on a wretched, neglected edge of the town cemetery, almost beyond its bounds, as if he had never existed. Emily, shivering from the cold and pervasive resentment, gazed at the fresh mound, her father's words echoing in her mind. "The truth always surfaces, Emily. Never forget." A feeling of deep compassion for herself, for her bitter fate, for her father, who had been cheated even after death, washed over her. When she returned to her empty, cold home, her gaze fell upon her father's old, worn Bible lying on the nightstand. Joseph had always carried it with him. It was his constant companion. Inside, between the yellowed pages, Emily found a folded scrap of paper. It was her father's last note, written in his weak, uneven hand just hours before his death. The words were clear and piercing. "Emily, my daughter, don't trust Crowley. He's a thief. Under the rock by the South Creek where we found gold, there's a buried chest. I left everything I had for you there. It's our land and the gold is ours too. Protect it. Trust no one." A sharp, searing pain pierced Emily's heart, not only because of the Undertaker's cruel deceit, which had stripped her of her last possession, but also because of her own oversight. She hadn't been able to protect her father, hadn't understood his desperate hints when he was still alive. The truth, revealed in the dying note, seemed unbearably cruel. Yet at the same time, it offered a new, desperate but powerful hope. Under the cover of night, Emily, armed with only an old shovel, set out for the South Creek. Her soul burned with a consuming anger at Crowley, at his merciless greed, at her own helplessness that had allowed him to so easily deceive her. This was an anger capable of moving mountains. Under the rock indicated in the note, hidden from prying eyes, she found a heavy wooden chest, buried shallowly but securely. Opening it, Emily gasped in surprise. Inside lay not only shimmering gold nuggets and small pouches of gold dust, her father's true wealth. There was also a stack of documents, old maps, notarized records, and letters. Among them was an official document, attested by the signatures of the local sheriff and a justice of the peace, confirming Joseph Miller's full and undeniable right to this plot of land, including all the riches found on it. Emily also discovered correspondence where Joseph meticulously described how Crowley, exploiting his position as an undertaker and his connections, regularly bought out the lands of recently deceased prospectors for next to nothing, knowing about their hidden riches in advance. The Undertaker wasn't just an individual swindler, he was part of an entire criminal scheme that systematically robbed orphaned families. Emily's anger reached its breaking point, transforming her grief into steely resolve. She realized that Crowley had not only deceived her, but also dozens, if not hundreds, of other simple, trusting people just like her. Her objective became clear and firm as steel. She would not only reclaim what was rightfully hers, but also expose Crowley so no one else would fall victim to his repulsive greed. It was time for a hunt for the truth. The next morning, Emily, her resolve unshaken, arrived at the sheriff's town office. With her was the heavy wooden chest, filled with gold and, more importantly, irrefutable documents. To Sheriff O'Malley, a man known for his honesty but sometimes slow to act, she recounted her entire story. From beginning to end, every word was backed by evidence, and crucially, her father's dying note. Emily saw how on the sheriff's face, slowly but surely, first came a shock at the sheer scale of what he heard, and then righteous anger. O'Malley, without wasting a minute, issued a warrant for Abel Crowley's arrest. When the Undertaker was brought into the office, his usually mournful face instantly paled at the sight of Emily, and the chest from which the incriminating papers had already been taken. He tried to deny everything, declaring his innocence and claiming it was all lies and slander. But his attempts were futile. Lincoln, the old town clerk, invited by the sheriff, carefully examined the documents and immediately confirmed the authenticity of the signatures on the maps and land deeds that Crowley, as it turned out, had been trying to falsify or conceal. The climax arrived when Joseph Miller's dying note was read aloud to the gathered crowd. A whisper ran through the town, quickly escalating into an indignant murmur. Dozens of families whom Crowley had swindled over his years of unscrupulous activity now realized they too had been robbed. Testimonies began to pour in one after another like a breached dam, exposing the Undertaker's long-hidden schemes, his cynical knack for profiting from others' grief by buying up land, knowing its hidden treasures in advance. Abel Crowley was immediately condemned, his reputation irrevocably destroyed, and all his property was confiscated to benefit his numerous victims. Emily, having reclaimed her land and, even more importantly, her father's gold, felt not just relief, but a deep, true vengeful satisfaction at the triumph of justice. The story of the unscrupulous Undertaker who swindled the dead and the dying note that shook the entire Wild West spread across the prairies, becoming a legend. It stood as proof that even from the grave, truth can find its way, and justice, though slow, will surely catch up to the guilty.